you fraud! This check proves it! You're a con artist stealing from these people!
Preston, calm down. That's not true.
Liar! Everyone look! He's a thief!
I did nothing wrong.
Get your muddy hands off my counter before you stain something valuable. Call the issuing bank and verify the check. Verify what? A farmer dressed like that carrying a check for $2 million. That check is real. Mr. Vale, pick up the phone and verify it before this gets worse. You don't belong in this bank, and you sure don't belong anywhere near that kind of money. Preston Vale's face tightened. He lifted the cashier's check high enough for the whole lobby to see, ripped it in half, and dropped the pieces on the counter. Warren Calloway did not reach for them. He did not raise his voice. Customers stared as Preston pointed toward the glass doors and ordered security to block the exit. Preston Vale had no idea he had just humiliated the man who owned 40% of the bank. The glass doors of First Harbor Bank opened with a quiet whoosh as Warren Calloway stepped inside. His worn leather boots made a soft squeak against the polished marble floor. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, laying long bright squares across the spotless lobby. Everything in that room was built to shine. Chrome fixtures gleamed, counters looked untouched, leather chairs sat perfectly arranged around glass tables. Covered with financial brochures, nobody seemed to read. Warren removed his straw hat as he walked, revealing gray hair flattened from a long stretch of work in the fields. His red flannel shirt had faded from years of washing. His sleeves were rolled back, showing forearms darkened and toughened by a lifetime under the sun. Mud still clung to the edges of his boots, even though he had scraped them carefully on the mat outside. The bank moved with quiet efficiency. Customers sat at desks, signing papers with polished advisors. 2 women waited in line, speaking softly about mortgage rates. Behind the counter, tellers counted money, stamped documents, and smiled the kind of careful smiles people practice in customer service. Warren joined the line and waited without complaint. He pulled a folded envelope from his shirt pocket and checked inside one more time. The cashier's check was still there, crisp, official, and heavy with numbers that would make most hands tremble. $2 million. It came from the sale of a narrow strip of land from his wife's family property. Land almost nobody had cared about until developers started circling it. When his turn came, Warren stepped to the counter, where a young teller with gentle eyes waited behind the glass partition. Her nameplate read Maris Colton. She looked nervous in a navy blazer that seemed too formal for her soft face. "Good afternoon," Warren said, his voice quiet and respectful. "I'd like to make a deposit into the Calloway Family Farms business account, please." Maris smiled. "Of course, Mr. Calloway. What kind of deposit are we making today?" Warren slid the check through the slot beneath the glass. "Cashier's check." Maris looked down at the paper, and Warren watched her expression change. Her smile faded. Her eyebrows lifted. She picked up the check, turned it over, and looked at it again, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something easier to believe. She said, glancing toward the offices in the back. "This is quite a large amount. I need to get my manager to help with the transaction." "That's fine," Warren said. "Take your time." Maris hurried away, her heels clicking across the floor. Warren heard her speaking in tense whispers somewhere beyond the counter. Other customers shifted in line, checked their watches, and looked around with mild irritation. A man in a sharp black suit soon came out of the manager's office. Preston Vale was younger than Warren expected, with carefully styled hair and a tie that looked more expensive than Warren's whole outfit. His face carried the expression of a man permanently annoyed by other people's existence. His eyes moved over Warren from hat to boots, stopping on the faded shirt and the worn cuffs. His mouth tightened into a thin line. He walked to the counter with the check in his hand, holding it, as if the paper itself might dirty his fingers. "Sir," Preston said, loud enough for the quiet lobby to hear. "I'm Preston Vale, branch manager. My teller tells me you're trying to deposit this check." "That's right," Warren said evenly. "Into my business account." Preston held the check up to the light and studied it with theatrical suspicion. $2 million, he said, letting his voice carry. That's quite a sum for someone in your line of work. A flush moved up Warren's neck, but his voice stayed calm. Farming pays better than some people think. Does it now? Preston's smile was sharp and cold. Because honestly, sir, looking at this document and looking at you, I'm thinking you may have picked the wrong bank for this little scheme. The lobby went silent. An elderly woman at a nearby desk stopped writing. The two women in line turned to stare openly. Even the tellers stopped their work and watched the scene unfold. Warren felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his hand steady on the counter. There is no scheme here, Mr. Vale. That is a legitimate cashier's check from Pioneer Trust Bank. You can verify it with one phone call. Can I? Preston's voice dripped with fake concern. You know what I think. I think you found this somewhere. Or maybe someone paid you to walk in here and try to cash it. Either way, I'm not about to let you commit fraud in my bank. Sir, Warren said, his patience thinning, but his voice still controlled. I'm asking you to do your job. Call the issuing bank and verify the check. Preston shook his head slowly, enjoying the performance. I don't need to make any phone calls. I can spot a fake from across the room. He lifted the check higher, waving it just enough for everyone to see. This check is fake. The silence stretched tight across the lobby. Every eye was fixed on the counter. Preston turned toward the back. Tobias, get over here. A tall man in a Navy security uniform stepped out from near the offices. Tobias Hale was older than most security guards, with graying hair and the careful posture of someone who had spent years in law enforcement. His face gave away little, but his eyes moved from Preston to Warren, reading the room. Stand by the doors, Preston ordered without looking at him. Make sure our friend here doesn't leave until we sort this out. Tobias positioned himself near the entrance, hands clasped behind his back. He said nothing, but Warren felt the weight of being watched. Trapped between the counter and the exit, Warren kept both hands flat on the marble so everyone could see them clearly. Mr. Vale, I'd like my check back, please. Preston laughed, a hard sound that cut through the room. Your check, this piece of garbage. He waved it dismissively. You walk into my bank looking like you just crawled out of a cornfield, tracking mud on my floors, and you expect me to believe you're carrying around $2 million. Heat rose in Warren's chest, but his voice stayed level. What I look like does not change what that check is, doesn't it? Preston stepped closer to the counter, his eyes bright with cruel amusement. Because I see a man in dirty work clothes trying to pass off fake paper to hardworking people. I see someone who thinks he can stroll in here and make fools of my staff. Near the customer service desk, Adeline Price sat quietly in a padded chair, filling out a deposit slip. She was a dignified woman with silver hair pulled neatly back and a cardigan buttoned over a simple dress. As Preston's voice grew louder and meaner, she lifted her eyes from the paper. Her expression hardened. Slowly, carefully, Adeline reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She held it low, angled it toward the counter, and pressed record. The screen captured Preston pointing at Warren while customers stared and whispered. You're disturbing real customers, Preston continued, gesturing toward the people in line. Honest folks who work for their money and don't try to scam their way into wealth. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. A businessman shifted uncomfortably. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Warren's jaw tightened. When he spoke, his words were calm and deliberate. Humiliating a customer in public does not make that check fake, Mr. Vale. It only makes you look unprofessional. Preston's face darkened. Unprofessional. You think I'm being unprofessional? He leaned forward across the counter. You walk into my bank trying to embarrass me and my staff with this pathetic con job, and now you want to lecture me about professionalism. I want you to do your job, Warren said quietly. Call your regional office. Call the issuing bank. Verify the check properly, instead of making assumptions. I don't need to call anyone. Preston's voice snapped like a whip. His composure was slipping, replaced by open contempt. I can spot trash when I see it, whether it's fake checks or the people trying to pass them. The insult hit the room like a physical blow. Several customers gasped. Adeline tightened her grip on the phone, and made sure it kept recording. Even Tobias shifted near the door, his professional mask cracking with concern. Preston straightened, flushed with anger and authority. He gripped the check with both hands, his knuckles pale against the paper. "You want to know what I think of your little scheme?" Before anyone could respond, Preston yanked his hands apart. The sound of tearing paper cracked through the silent lobby. The $2 million cashier's check ripped cleanly in half. The pieces fluttered down onto the marble counter between them. Preston's chest rose and fell as he glared at Warren. Then he pointed one trembling finger toward the glass doors. "Get out of my bank!" The torn pieces lay on the counter like shattered glass. Warren stared down at them, his weathered hands still resting on the edge of the marble. For a moment, the whole bank seemed frozen. Then Preston turned toward Tobias. "Don't let him leave. I want him held here until the police get here." Tobias shifted his weight, one hand moving instinctively toward his radio. He had worked bank security long enough to follow orders, but something about this felt wrong. Still, Preston was his boss. "You heard me?" Preston snapped. "This man just tried to pass a fraudulent instrument worth $2 million. That's a serious crime. Keep him here." Whispers rippled through the lobby. A couple near the information desk exchanged worried looks and turned away quickly, as if looking at Warren too long might make them part of the trouble. But not everyone looked away. A young mother held her child close and watched with wide eyes. Two college-aged women near the automated teller machines raised their phones and started recording. Warren's surprise slowly hardened into something cooler and more focused. He looked from the torn check to Preston's flushed face, studying the manager with the patience of a man who had spent his life watching storms build over open fields. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Put that accusation in writing." Preston blinked. "What? You're claiming I tried to commit fraud. You destroyed what you say is evidence. Put your accusation in writing, with your signature." Preston laughed, but it sounded thinner now. "You should be worried about jail, not paperwork." "Old man, do you really think anyone will believe your sad little story once the police arrive?" Behind the counter, Maris Colton watched with growing unease. She had worked at First Harbor long enough to know Preston could be cruel when he felt challenged. But this felt bigger than a routine customer dispute. Her hands trembled as she pulled up the account system on her terminal. Callaway Family Farms. The name stirred something in her memory. She scrolled through the business account details. Her eyes widened at the deposit history, the balance, the account status. Then she saw a confidential note, visible only to senior staff, a note about ownership structures and board relationships. Her breath caught. With shaking fingers, she opened the secure messaging system and typed fast. "Vivian, urgent situation in lobby with account holder Warren Callaway, manager Preston involved. Please advise immediately." Across the lobby, Adeline Price continued recording. She had spent decades as a school principal, and those years had taught her to recognize a bully. The way Preston stood over Warren, the way he used authority to humiliate someone he believed had no power, was textbook intimidation. Preston paced behind the counter, polished shoes clicking against the floor. "You know what's going to happen now. I'm closing every account you have, every single one, and you're banned from this branch permanently. You'll have to drive to another town if you want to bank anywhere in this system." Warren watched him without changing expression. "The check you tore up was a verified cashier's check from Pioneer Trust Bank. The serial number can be confirmed with one phone call. I don't care if it came from the Federal Reserve." Preston spun around, pointing an accusing finger. "You don't dress like someone with that kind of money. You don't talk like someone who belongs in here. And you sure don't. You just destroyed property tied to a verified cashier's check," Warren interrupted. His voice cut through Preston's rant like a blade. "That is not fraud prevention. That is destruction of a legal financial instrument." The room went quiet again. Even the whispers stopped. Tobias shifted uncomfortably near the door. His training told him that legitimate cashier's checks were not things you simply tore in half, no matter who carried them. Warren straightened his shoulders, eyes still on Preston. Before you call the police, call your boss. The glass doors of First Harbor Bank flew open hard enough to rattle their frames. Vivian Bellamy strode into the lobby, heels striking the marble with sharp, controlled urgency. She wore a crisp navy blazer and carried herself with the authority of someone used to handling regional banking operations. Her face showed tight irritation, the look of a woman pulled away from important work to fix what she assumed was an ordinary complaint. Then she saw the counter. A black farmer in work clothes stood perfectly still beside the teller station. Torn pieces of what appeared to be a check lay scattered on the marble. Preston Vale paced behind the counter like a caged animal, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, his tie crooked. But it was the farmer's face that made Vivian's stomach drop. Warren Calloway. She knew him from board photographs, shareholder reports, and private files only senior executives were allowed to review. Quiet, dignified, unassuming. The kind of man who could walk into a room wearing farm clothes and be completely underestimated by everyone inside it. Preston rushed toward her, relief flooding his face. Vivian, thank heaven you're here. This man tried to deposit a fake check for $2 million. When I called him out, he became aggressive and started making threats. I had to destroy the fraudulent document as evidence. Warren stayed silent. His dark eyes moved between Preston and Vivian with the patient observation of someone watching people reveal themselves. He was disturbing customers. Preston continued, gesturing around the lobby. Making wild claims about property and special treatment. I've handled situations like this before. These people think they can. Stop talking. Vivian's voice cut through him like ice. She moved closer to the counter, eyes fixed on the torn pieces. Even damaged, she could see enough of the routing numbers, seals, and security features to recognize a legitimate cashier's check from Pioneer Trust Bank. Her gaze moved to Warren's face. Calm, watchful, not surprised. This was not the expression of a man caught in a lie. It was the expression of a man who had expected exactly this. Preston looked confused. Vivian, we need to call security and have this man removed before. Mr. Calloway, Vivian said, and her tone changed completely. The irritation vanished, replaced by careful respect. Sir, I am deeply sorry for what happened here. The lobby fell silent. Preston's mouth opened, then closed. Customers leaned forward. Maris stopped pretending to work and stared. Warren nodded once but said nothing. His silence was stronger than any outburst. Vivian picked up the torn check pieces and examined them more closely. Serial numbers, security features, official seals. Everything pointed to authenticity. She looked at Preston, whose confidence was slowly cracking into confusion and fear. Preston, she said quietly, and her voice carried across the lobby. He owns 40% of this bank. The words hit the room like thunder. 40% ownership. Customers shifted in their chairs and exchanged stunned looks. Some began texting. Others simply stared, trying to understand how completely they had misjudged the quiet farmer at the counter. Preston's face drained of color. His mouth moved several times before words came out. Mr. Calloway, I had no idea. This is a terrible misunderstanding. His voice cracked as he reached toward the torn check pieces. I can fix this right away. We'll process a replacement. We'll expedite everything through priority services. Warren looked at Preston's outstretched hand, but did not shake it. His expression stayed calm, almost curious, as if he were watching something predictable unfold. A misunderstanding, Warren repeated softly. Yes, exactly, Preston said too quickly. These things happen in banking. Documentation gets mixed up. Communication breaks down. I'll personally handle your account from now on, whatever you need. What I needed, Warren said, his voice clear across the marble floor, was basic human respect. What I got was being called a fraud, having my check torn up, and being threatened with arrest in front of all these people. Tobias stepped away from the door where he had been blocking Warren's exit. His face showed embarrassment and rising anger. He had spent that tense stretch treating an innocent customer like a criminal, because Preston had exaggerated the threat. "Sir," Tobias said to Warren, "I apologize for my part in this. I was given false information." Warren nodded at him. "At least one person here knows how to recognize wrong and own it." Vivian stepped forward, executive training taking over as she tried to contain what had become a public disaster. "Mr. Calloway, perhaps we can discuss this privately in our conference room. I'm sure we can resolve everything quietly, and to your complete satisfaction." Several customers groaned. Adeline Price lowered her phone just enough to shake her head. Moving the conversation behind closed doors felt less like accountability and more like image control. Warren bent down and carefully gathered the torn pieces of his check. He handled them like evidence. Every movement was slow and deliberate. "All right," he said at last. "We can talk privately." He followed Vivian toward the hallway, then paused and turned back to Preston. "Mr. Vale," Warren said, his voice carrying clearly. This was never only about one check. A chill moved through the room. Preston's forced smile collapsed. There was something in Warren's tone that told everyone the torn check was only the beginning. In the conference room, Vivian closed the door and gestured toward a polished mahogany table, surrounded by leather chairs. "Please have a seat. Can I get you coffee or water? I want to address every concern you have." Warren remained standing. He placed a weathered manila folder on the table. The folder was thick, worn at the edges, and held together with an old rubber band. It looked painfully out of place in the spotless corporate room. Vivian's professional smile flickered as she stared at it. Something about the way Warren handled the folder made it clear that it carried more than routine banking papers. "Mr. Calloway," Vivian said, "I want to assure you that what happened today was unacceptable. Preston's behavior was unprofessional, and it will be addressed through our disciplinary process. We'll also implement additional training for customer-facing staff." Warren opened the folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, photocopied documents, handwritten notes, old bank statements, foreclosure notices, and property maps. The papers were organized with the careful precision of someone who had spent a long time building a case. "These are records," Warren said quietly, "of black farmers, elderly widows, and rural landowners who lost property after strange account freezes, sudden loan reviews, and suspicious appraisals." He looked up at Vivian. "All connected to this bank." Vivian leaned forward, trying to read from across the table. "I'm sure there are reasonable explanations for any irregularities you noticed. Banking regulations are complex, and legitimate business practices can sometimes look confusing to customers who aren't familiar with." Warren lifted a stack of handwritten notes. The pages were yellowing, filled with dates, names, and observations written in careful blue ink. "My wife died trying to prove what your bank was doing." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Vivian stared at the pages in Warren's hands, her composure beginning to crack. Warren spread the first few notes across the table. Eliza's handwriting covered lined paper, neat and exact. Every entry was detailed. Every incident had been recorded with the seriousness of someone who knew documentation might one day matter. "Eliza taught school for most of her life," Warren said. "She knew how to research, she knew how to keep records, and she knew when something wasn't right." He pointed to one entry. "The Ellison family owned land next to our eastern boundary. They had farmed it for generations and never missed a payment. Then the bank marked one of their payments late, even though the receipt showed it was made on time." Vivian read the note carefully. "Payment received, bank receipt recorded, payment later marked late. No explanation provided." Eliza noticed the pattern after it happened to neighboring families, Warren continued. "The Reeds, the Carters, the Ellisons, black farming families with clean payment histories, their payments were marked late, even when receipts proved otherwise. Their land was undervalued during loan renewals. Appraisals came back far below market value." Vivian's jaw tightened as she read. Each story followed the same shape. Mysterious late fees, reduced credit lines, accelerated payment demands, then foreclosure proceedings that moved with unusual speed. "Where did your wife get these documents?" Vivian asked, her tone changing from apologetic to cautious. Warren turned another page, revealing photocopied statements and foreclosure notices. Eliza gathered them before her illness worsened. Some came from the families, some came from public records, some came from people inside the system who were tired of watching good people lose everything. The next page showed a hand-drawn county map. Colored marks showed properties that had been foreclosed. A clear pattern emerged. The lost farms formed a corridor along a proposed commercial development route. After foreclosure, the land was sold to development companies, Warren said. Shell corporations with clean names and empty faces. Eliza traced the ownership chains. They all led back to the same investors. Outside the conference room, Preston paced near the teller stations, polished shoes clicking against marble. Sweat had begun to show through his expensive shirt. He approached Tobias, who was reviewing lobby footage on a tablet. "We need to discuss the incident recording," Preston said in a low voice. Tobias looked up. "What about it?" "The footage needs to be edited. Customer privacy concerns. We should prepare a shorter clip that focuses on the resolution instead of the misunderstanding." Tobias's finger paused. "You want me to delete parts of the recording?" "Not delete. Edit for clarity. Remove portions that could be taken out of context." Preston's voice carried a desperate edge. That old man was disruptive. He was causing a scene. The full footage doesn't show the complete picture. Tobias saved the file and closed the tablet. His years in law enforcement had taught him when someone was asking him to cross a line. "I'll need to think about the technical side," he said carefully. Meanwhile, the bank's public relations staff gathered in a smaller office and drafted a statement meant to shrink the day's events into something harmless. First Harbor Bank regrets a miscommunication during a routine customer interaction. The matter has been resolved, and we remain committed to serving every member of our community with respect and professionalism. Back in the conference room, Vivian closed Eliza's folder and looked directly at Warren. "Mr. Calloway, I understand your concerns, and I appreciate the thoroughness of your wife's research. But I must warn you that making these accusations publicly could damage everyone involved." Warren met her eyes without blinking. His weathered hands rested calmly on the table, but his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had already made his choice. Good damage tells the truth where silence failed. Later, Vivian stood in the main lobby and addressed the remaining staff with carefully measured words. "Effective immediately, Preston Vale has been placed on administrative leave while we review today's events. All customer concerns will come directly to me until further notice." The tellers nodded, but their eyes kept drifting toward the hallway where Preston had disappeared. He had not left the building. Instead, he had locked himself in the back office that held personnel files, loan records, and account histories. Vivian had given him access to gather personal belongings, but he was not packing. His hands shook as he dialed a number he had memorized, but hoped never to use in panic. The call was answered by a calm, controlled voice. "Sterling Langford." "Sterling, it's Preston. We have a problem." The silence on the other end lasted long enough for Preston to hear his own heartbeat. Sterling Langford was not a man who liked problems, especially problems that threatened the network of shell companies, development partnerships, and land acquisitions that had made him wealthy. "Explain," Sterling said. Preston's words spilled out. "The Calloway situation. The old black farmer. He's not some nobody with a fake check. He owns 40% of the bank's parent company. He has records. His wife was investigating us before she died." Another silence. Preston pictured Sterling in his glass office, wearing a tailored suit, measuring risk with the same cold precision he brought to every business deal. "What kind of records?" Sterling asked. "Land transfers, foreclosure timelines, the Reed farm, the Carter place, maybe more. He knows about the corridor project." "Then control the situation before he connects bank records to land acquisitions," Sterling said. "Do whatever it takes." The line went dead. Preston stared at the phone. Then he turned to his computer and began pulling account files. searching for anything that could discredit Warren Calloway before the old farmer destroyed everything. Across town, Adeline Price sat in her modest living room uploading her video. She had taught school for decades, and those years had taught her the power of evidence. Her phone had captured Preston's cruelest moments with perfect clarity. The contempt in his face when he saw Warren's clothes, the deliberate destruction of the check. The finger pointed toward the door. She typed a simple caption. "This is how First Harbor Bank treats its customers. Share it so it doesn't happen to someone else." The video spread fast. Local residents who had banked at First Harbor for years watched Preston Vale humiliate an elderly farmer and recognized something familiar. The bank's phone began ringing. "This is exactly what happened to my grandmother," one caller told Maris. "They treated her like she was stupid because she couldn't read the fine print." Another caller described how Preston had questioned disability payments and demanded extra paperwork until she felt like a criminal for asking for help. Another man said Preston had accused him of lying about his military pension. "I thought it was just me," the man said. "I thought maybe I was too old to understand modern banking." Maris wrote down every complaint. Her pen moved faster as the pattern became impossible to deny. What happened to Warren was not an isolated incident. It was a system. Warren left the bank with Vivian's written promise that his business account would be restored, the torn check replaced, and an official apology drafted. But he knew the true fight had only begun. Eliza's folder held more than stories of past victims. It held names, connections, and records that could ruin careers and send powerful people to court. Preston's public humiliation of Warren had not been the end. It had been the opening move. Tobias waited until the building was almost empty before returning to his security office. He pulled up the lobby footage and watched Preston tear the check with deliberate malice. Then he inserted a flash drive and copied the files. His police training had taught him that evidence could disappear when powerful people felt threatened. The original footage sat on bank servers where others might reach it. The copy in his pocket would be harder to erase. As Warren drove his old pickup down the winding road toward Calloway Family Farms, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Saw the video. My family lost our land the same way. Can we talk?" Then another. "Preston did this to us too." And another. "We have documents." Back at the bank, Sterling Langford's black sedan pulled into the executive parking area. He entered through the rear and found Preston hunched over computer files in the back office. Sterling's silver hair was perfect. His navy suit was immaculate. His eyes held the cold calculation of a man used to removing obstacles. "Show me what he has," Sterling said. Preston pulled up account records, own histories, and foreclosure documents. The pattern was damning. Targeted pressure against black landowners whose properties sat along the proposed development corridor. Sterling studied the screen without expression. At last he turned to Preston. "That old man knows too much." That evening, Warren drove his weathered pickup up the gravel driveway to the farmhouse he had shared with Eliza for decades. The white clapboard siding needed paint, and the front porch sagged a little where a support beam had settled. But the land behind it stretched in clean rows of soybeans and corn, catching the last warm light of day. He parked beside Eliza's old garden. Wild roses had grown over the edges since her illness took her away from the soil she loved. Inside, the house still carried faint traces of her lavender soap and the lemon oil she used on the kitchen table. Warren placed her folder beside the framed photograph that sat in the center of that table. In the picture, Eliza smiled back with bright eyes and silver hair pinned in the neat bun she always wore to church. "Well, Eliza," Warren said quietly as he sat across from the photograph. Preston showed his hand just like you said he would. He opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, foreclosure notices, loan modification letters, handwritten notes. Eliza's careful handwriting filled page after page with observations and connections. The Felton family lost land after a sudden loan review flagged their property as high risk. A bank appraiser valued it far below market price. Soon after, a development company bought it at auction for that same low amount. The Reed farm fell to foreclosure after the bank claimed mortgage payments were consistently late. even though bank-stamped receipts proved they had arrived on time. The family fought until they had nothing left. A shell company purchased the land shortly after. Mrs. Bernice Holloway, an elderly widow, signed away family property after bank representatives told her the mortgage was in default, and she faced immediate eviction. The land later became part of a retail development. Pattern after pattern emerged from Eliza's documentation. The victims were elderly, rural, and black. The buyers were shell companies with addresses that traced back to law firms, post office boxes, and development groups. Warren had watched Eliza work on these files during her final months, when she was too weak to tend her garden, but too stubborn to stop fighting. He had thought she was preserving injustice, so it would not be forgotten. He had not realized she was building a legal case. Then he reached for the manila envelope tucked behind the statements. Eliza's handwriting on the outside read, "Only when they show their hand." Inside was a detailed map of the proposed River Valley Commercial Corridor, a massive project stretching along the highway. Colored sections marked retail centers, offices, subdivisions, and industrial sites. Every foreclosed farm sat directly in the corridor's path. The Felton land was marked for a shopping complex. The Reed property was marked for luxury condominiums. Mrs. Holloway's family farm was marked for a medical center, and Callaway Family Farms sat at the center, marked with a red star and the words, "Key Acquisition." Warren's hands trembled. The bank had not been making random mistakes. It had been helping create financial crises for landowners whose properties blocked a development project. The $2 million cashier's check suddenly made sense. The payment had come from Riverbend Development, a company connected to Sterling Langford's holdings. Sterling's signature appeared on the development proposal beside architectural renderings and profit projections. But Warren had not sold his entire farm. He had sold only a narrow strip along the eastern boundary, land that flooded every spring and had little farming value. To the developers, that strip was essential for an access road. They believed they had trapped him. Without that strip, they thought pressure would force him to sell the rest. They believed an elderly farmer would have no choice. They had not known about Eliza's investigation. They had not known about the shares she had quietly purchased over the years, building Warren's position until he became one of the bank's largest private investors. They had not known that every cruel word, every destroyed document, every lie, and every threat was being recorded. Warren laid the development map beside Eliza's photograph. The planned corridor matched her notes perfectly. Every family that had lost land had owned property directly in the project's path. At the bottom of the map, in Eliza's careful handwriting, were 3 words. They planned this. Warren found Sterling Langford's name printed at the bottom of the agreement, along with his title as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Langford Group Holdings. The same man sat on the bank's board. The same man had approved suspicious deals that destroyed farming families. Warren touched Eliza's photograph gently. "Eliza, you were right." Before sunrise, Arden Whitaker's sedan pulled into the gravel driveway at Callaway Family Farms. Warren had been awake for hours, sitting at Eliza's kitchen table with files spread before him and coffee going cold. He opened the door before she could knock. Arden Whitaker was a sharp-eyed attorney in a navy suit, focused and calm. The kind of lawyer who built cases piece by piece and never accepted easy answers. "Mr. Callaway," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for calling me. I've been following your wife's work longer than you might expect." They sat at the kitchen table, while dawn slowly filled the windows. Arden opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, marked with Eliza's name. Warren's eyebrows lifted. "Eliza contacted me before she passed," Arden explained. "She knew she was running out of time. She wanted to make sure someone could continue her investigation if needed. I've been reviewing land records, foreclosure patterns, and development connections ever since." Warren poured coffee for both of them, his movements careful. "She never told me she reached out to an attorney. She was protecting you," Arden said gently. "She knew challenging people like Sterling Langford and institutions like First Harbor Bank could put you in danger. She wanted the evidence gathered first. Then she wanted to strike when the case was solid. Arden spread property documents across the table. Your land sale recorded exactly as planned. You sold only the strip along the eastern boundary to Riverbend Development. That transaction gives them access, but it also forces them to reveal their ownership structure. She pointed to a highlighted section. Riverbend is controlled by Langford Holdings, which connects directly to Sterling Langford's position on the bank board. By accepting their money, you created a paper trail between the foreclosures and the development project. Warren nodded slowly. I kept the heart of the farm, the land they really need. Exactly. They thought they were trapping you, but you trapped them instead. The partial sale forces them to negotiate for the rest, and every conversation, offer, and pressure tactic becomes evidence. Warren watched the sunrise paint his fields gold. I brought that check to the bank to test Preston's branch. Eliza's files showed they were targeting older farmers, but I needed to see if they would treat me the same way. And Preston performed perfectly, Arden said with grim satisfaction. He humiliated you in public, destroyed bank property, and showed exactly the kind of discriminatory behavior Eliza documented. The lobby footage and witnesses will matter. Then her expression grew serious. The problem is, Preston and Sterling now know you have records. They know Eliza investigated them. They know you're not an isolated farmer they can intimidate and ignore. What does that mean for the case? It means they will fight harder. Banks have tools individual farmers don't. They can freeze accounts, delay payments, and create obstacles that hurt your operation while keeping their hands technically clean. Warren's phone buzzed. A message from his farm foreman, Rafael Santos, said the crew had arrived early and was ready to start in the north field. They're good men, Warren said, looking out the window. Rafael has been with me for years. The others have families who depend on this work. Arden gathered her papers. Be careful, Mr. Calloway. You embarrassed Preston Vale in front of the entire bank. Now he will try to make you pay for it. As Arden drove away, Warren's phone rang with an automated message from First Harbor Bank. Your business account has been placed under fraud review and temporarily frozen pending investigation. All automatic payments and transfers have been suspended. Warren stared at the phone in his hand. Then he looked across the field where his workers waited, counting on their paychecks, trusting him to provide the work their families needed. Preston Vale had just declared war on Calloway Family Farms. Warren walked toward the equipment shed where the crew waited near the combine and tractors. Rafael Santos looked up from checking hydraulic lines, concern creasing his weathered face when he saw Warren's expression. Morning, boss. The men are ready for the north field. Warren stopped in front of the group. Several workers stood around him, men who had worked his land for years, men whose families depended on steady wages. I need to tell you something, Warren said. The bank froze our business account. They're calling it a fraud review. Silence settled over the group. Raphael's younger brother shifted nervously. Desmond, the newest hire, looked down at his boots. Everett, who had children at home, swallowed hard. What does that mean for us? Everett asked. It means payroll is delayed, Warren said plainly. The automatic deposit system is blocked. I cannot access the farm's operating account until the freeze is lifted. Raphael's brother stepped forward, worry clear in his voice. How long will this take? My wife just had surgery. We need the insurance payments to go through. Boss, Desmond said quietly, I was counting on this pay to cover my truck. If I miss it, they could take it. Warren raised his hand, stopping the panic before it spread. Listen to me carefully. Every person here will be paid. Every dollar you earned. Every benefit you're owed. Every promise I made to you and your families will be kept. Raphael studied him. How? If the bank account is frozen. I have other resources, Warren said. It was true. His personal accounts, investment holdings, and ownership stake gave him access to funds beyond the frozen farm account. This freeze is not about fraud. It is pressure. Someone wants to hurt me by hurting all of you. So we keep working, Everett asked. If you choose to. The harvest does not stop because a bank manager is playing games. But I understand if anyone needs other work until this is resolved. I won't hold that against you. We stay, Raphael said immediately. The others nodded. Then get the equipment ready, Warren said. I have business in town. Later, Warren drove toward First Harbor Bank with a car full of allies. Arden sat in the passenger seat reviewing documents. Behind them, Adeline Price checked her phone camera. 2 others rode with them. Leon Mercer, who had lost family land to a suspicious foreclosure, and Viola Hargrove, whose late husband's property had been seized after the bank claimed insurance payments were never received. They'll try to separate us, Arden warned as they approached the bank. Banks hate public confrontation. They want private rooms where they can control the story. Let them try, Adeline said. I'm done being quiet about what these people do. Inside the bank, Vivian appeared quickly when the group approached the customer service desk. Instead of greeting them in the open lobby, she gestured toward a hallway. Mr. Calloway, I think it would be better if we discussed your concerns privately. No, Warren said. We stay here. Vivian's professional smile strained. I understand your frustration, but this is a private financial matter. Nothing about what happened to him was private, Adeline said, her voice carrying the authority of a former principal. Preston humiliated this man in front of everyone. Now you want to hide the solution. Mrs. Price, I appreciate your concern, but my concern is that this bank has been cheating people for years, Leon interrupted. My family lost everything because of mysterious account problems that were never explained. Viola stepped forward, holding a folder. My husband paid that loan for decades and never missed a payment. Then the bank claimed we were in default and took our home. Vivian looked around the lobby as customers began watching. Please, let's handle this professionally. Mr. Calloway, I can have our legal department prepare a settlement offer that addresses your concerns. What kind of settlement? Arden asked sharply. A fair compensation package for the incident, plus a guarantee it will not happen again. In exchange for what? Warren asked, though he already knew. Vivian hesitated. A confidentiality agreement. No public statements about the bank or its employees, no social media posts, no interviews. No, Warren said immediately. You want to pay me to stay quiet about what Preston did. You want to pay me to ignore what happened to Leon, Viola, and everyone else. Your bank cheated them. Vivian's composure cracked. Mr. Calloway, we're trying to resolve this reasonably. Reasonable would be admitting what your bank has been doing for years. Reasonable would be investigating every suspicious foreclosure, every manipulated appraisal, every elderly farmer who lost land after dealing with Preston Vale. That is not going to happen, Vivian said firmly. Then we have nothing to discuss, Warren replied. He led his group toward the exit. That night, after harvest work and legal planning, Warren returned to the farm. Darkness settled over the fields as he parked near the farmhouse and walked toward the barn to check equipment before dinner. The smell of smoke hit him first. Then he saw orange light flickering through the barn windows. Warren ran, pulling out his phone to call for help. The main doors stood open, and that was wrong. He never left the barn unlocked. Inside, smoke filled the air. Small flames crackled in the office corner. File cabinets stood open, papers scattered everywhere. Desk drawers had been pulled out and emptied. Some documents burned inside a metal wastebasket knocked on its side. Warren grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and sprayed foam over the flames, coughing through the smoke as he worked. The fire was small, contained to the office. It had not been meant to burn the barn to the ground. It had been meant to destroy evidence. When the flames were out, Warren surveyed the damage. Eliza's folder was gone. The maps, the loan documents, the handwritten notes, the records she had spent so long gathering. Copies of appraisal reports had been burned. Her documentation of the bank's pattern of abuse had been targeted. Near the desk, Warren found Eliza's photograph, the one he kept beside his computer. The glass was cracked, and smoke darkened the edges, but her face was still visible, still watchful, still determined. Warren stood in the smoke-filled barn, holding the damaged photograph, believing Eliza's evidence was gone forever. The farmhouse kitchen felt smaller with 4 people around the old wooden table. Warren sat hunched over cold coffee, still wearing clothes that smelled of smoke. The fire department had left. The sheriff had taken his statement. Sleep had not come. Arden spread legal documents across the scarred table, while Adeline poured fresh coffee. Tobias Hale sat in a chair that seemed too small for his broad shoulders, still wrestling with how fully Preston had lied to him. "They took everything," Warren said quietly, staring at the cracked photograph of Eliza beside his cup. "All of Eliza's work, all the proof she spent so long gathering. It's gone." Arden looked up from her papers and studied him. She had seen clients lose hope before, but this was the first time Warren Calloway looked truly shaken. "Warren," she said carefully, "how well did you know your wife?" He looked at her. "What do you mean? Did Eliza ever do anything halfway? Did she trust only one person to remember what mattered? Did she keep just one copy of anything important?" Warren's hands tightened around the mug. He stared at Eliza's photograph and remembered her careful nature, her stubborn thoroughness, her absolute refusal to let important things slip away. "She always said trust, but verify," he murmured. "She kept receipts, she kept copies of letters. She photographed important papers before filing them. And while she was investigating the bank," Arden said, "did she change any habits?" Warren closed his eyes. During her final months, Eliza had grown more secretive and careful. She spent long stretches organizing papers, mailing letters to herself, making copies of things he did not understand. "She wore a key around her neck," he said suddenly. "A small brass key on a chain. She never took it off, not even at the hospital. I still have it upstairs." Adeline leaned forward. "What did it open?" "I never asked. Eliza said it was for something she would explain when the time was right." Warren stood and walked toward the pantry. "She told me once that the most important thing should be hidden where people look every day, but never really see." The pantry was narrow and deep, filled with canned goods, old jars, and supplies collected over the years. Warren moved boxes, flour containers, and dusty jars of pickled beets until his fingers touched a metal box wedged into the back corner. It was an old recipe box, the kind used for family cooking cards. A small brass lock matched Eliza's key. Warren carried the box back to the table. His hands were steadier now. He brought the key from upstairs and opened the lock. Inside, arranged with Eliza's unmistakable precision, were items that made everyone go silent. Flash drives in labeled envelopes. Certified copies of documents with official stamps. Sealed letters Eliza had mailed to herself to preserve discovery dates. Printed emails between bank officers. Altered appraisal reports with original versions placed beside modified ones. Foreclosure timelines showing a pattern of abuse across years. On top lay a handwritten note. "For Warren, when they think they have won." Tobias let out a low breath. How much did she gather? Arden was already examining the documents. "This is more than we lost in the fire. This is a complete case file. Bank emails, financial records, corporate connections." She looked up at Warren. "Your wife built a prosecutor's dream." "There's more," Warren said, pulling out a manila envelope marked video recordings. Inside were more flash drives labeled by place and incident. Eliza had recorded conversations, documented meetings, preserved everything. Tobias reached into his jacket and pulled out his own flash drive. "Add this. Full lobby footage. Every angle. Complete timeline. And I can testify that Preston specifically asked me to delete certain camera angles and replace the record with edited clips." Adeline examined one of Eliza's sealed letters. She mailed this evidence to herself so the dates would be established. Your wife knew exactly what she was doing. Warren spread the documents across the table and saw connections he had not fully understood. Preston's name appeared in emails discussing problem accounts and acquisition opportunities. Sterling Langford's company received updates about vulnerable properties becoming available through foreclosure. Senior bank officers were copied on messages about appraisal values and accelerated loan reviews for elderly and minority landowners. "They didn't just steal Eliza's folder," Warren said slowly. "They stole the visible evidence. The real proof was hidden right here in our kitchen." Arden smiled grimly. They walked right into her trap. Warren looked at the evidence spread across the table, where Eliza had eaten breakfast every morning. The stolen folder had been bait, designed to make the bank believe it had destroyed the proof, while the true archive waited safely behind jars and preserves. Now, Warren said, "We let them walk into the room thinking they've already won." The upstairs boardroom of First Harbor Bank smelled like leather and old money. Heavy chairs surrounded a polished table that reflected pale morning light through tall windows. Board members filed in quietly for what Sterling Langford had called an emergency shareholder protection meeting. Sterling sat at the head of the table, silver hair, perfect, dark suit sharp enough to buy a small farm. He had arrived claiming Warren Calloway represented a threat to the bank's stability and reputation. His briefcase contained legal documents meant to limit Warren's voting power through emergency bylaw changes. "We cannot allow one disgruntled customer to destroy this institution," Sterling told the board. "Calloway is unstable. He made wild accusations, disrupted operations, and encouraged customers to spread false stories online." Patricia Wells shifted in her chair. She had seen Adeline's video. She had watched Preston tear up a legitimate check in front of witnesses. "Shouldn't we investigate his claims before restricting his ownership rights?" "There's nothing to investigate," Sterling replied smoothly. "A confused old man brought suspicious paperwork and became belligerent when staff followed fraud prevention procedures." Preston Vale acted professionally under pressure. Preston nodded from his seat near the window, his confidence restored after the barn fire. "Exactly. Calloway threatened the staff, disrupted customers, and refused to accept that his check required additional verification. When we tried to handle it quietly, he started making accusations about conspiracy and discrimination." Vivian Bellamy sat at the far end of the table, fingers drumming against her portfolio. She had reviewed Warren's ownership rights and the bank's legal obligations to major shareholders. "We should delay this vote. Calloway's ownership rights cannot be altered without proper notice." "The notice period is waived under emergency provisions," Sterling interrupted. "This board has authority to protect the institution from shareholder actions that threaten stability." "But he owns 40% of the parent company," Vivian insisted. "We cannot simply—" "We can and we will," Sterling said. "When a shareholder damages the bank's reputation or interferes with operations, the board may suspend voting privileges pending review." Through the tall windows, board members could see the lobby below filling with people. Cars kept arriving outside. Word had spread through the community. Former customers entered with foreclosure notices, payment receipts, account statements, and folders of old pain. "Look at that crowd," a board member muttered. "This is exactly the problem." Calloway stirred up the whole town. "Those are our customers," Vivian said quietly. "People who banked here for years. Maybe we should listen." Sterling's jaw tightened. "They're listening to an old man who cannot accept that his paperwork was questionable." Preston showed caution. Now Calloway is turning a routine security matter into some kind of discrimination claim. Preston leaned forward. The evidence of his fraud attempt burned in that convenient barn fire. Now he's using his ownership stake to intimidate us instead of facing the consequences. The boardroom door opened and the secretary stepped inside nervously. "Excuse me, Mr. Langford, but there's a group requesting access to this meeting. They're downstairs with Mr. Calloway." Sterling smiled coldly. "Tell them this is private. If Calloway wants to file a complaint, he can schedule through proper channels." "Sir, they're not leaving. Reporters are outside too." Preston's confidence flickered, but Sterling stayed calm. "Let them make noise in the lobby. We'll handle this legally and professionally, which is more than Calloway deserves." Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Several people were climbing the stairs, their voices low but determined. "They wouldn't dare interrupt a board meeting," someone muttered. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A firm knock followed. Sterling straightened his tie. "Come in." The door opened. Warren Calloway stepped into the boardroom wearing the same faded red flannel shirt, worn jeans, muddy boots, and straw hat that had made Preston judge him so harshly. His calm eyes moved across the table, taking in each face before settling on Sterling. Behind him came Arden Whitaker with a leather briefcase. Adeline Price followed with her phone ready to record. Tobias Hale entered next, no longer wearing the bank security uniform. Then came elderly farmers and widows carrying foreclosure documents, people who had never been invited upstairs before. Preston saw Warren and smirked. "You should have stayed on your farm." Warren walked to the head of the table, with the same steady pace he used crossing his fields. His muddy boots left faint prints on the polished floor. He looked at every board member, then at Sterling, then at Preston. "Ladies and gentlemen," Warren said quietly, "I believe we have business to discuss." Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "This is a private board meeting. You have no right to bring these people in here and disrupt proceedings. Security, remove them." "I am security," Tobias said from the doorway, "and I'm not removing anyone until the truth is on the table." Sterling's face reddened. "Calloway, your attempt to damage this bank with false accusations ends now. You will face charges for fraud, intimidation, and defamation. These people are trespassing." Warren reached into his shirt pocket and placed a small recording device on the table. "Before we talk about reputation, let's watch what your manager did to mine." Adeline connected her phone to the wall monitor. The screen lit up with Preston behind the counter, Warren's $2 million check in his hand. The audio was clear. "This check is fake," Preston's recorded voice said. "You picked the wrong bank for this. People like you think you can walk in here and embarrass us with your A board member shifted uncomfortably as the recording continued. The video showed Warren asking politely for verification, while Preston mocked his clothes, his work, and his right to stand inside the bank. Then came the moment that made several board members gasp. Preston held the check high and tore it in half, dropping the pieces onto the counter like trash. "Get out of my bank!" he shouted on the recording. The boardroom went silent, except for the echo of Preston's recorded voice. The real Preston sat frozen in his chair, watching his career begin to collapse on the wall monitor. "That was taken out of context," he said desperately. "He was aggressive. He was making threats. The security footage will show." "Actually, it won't," Tobias said. He stepped forward with his tablet. "Because you asked me to edit the security footage. You wanted me to cut out the parts where you humiliated Mr. Calloway without cause." Tobias connected his tablet, and the board watched full security footage from multiple angles. It showed Warren entering calmly, approaching the counter politely, and standing still, while Preston berated him. At no point did Warren shout, threaten, or behave aggressively. "I saved the complete footage," Tobias said. "Every camera angle, every minute." Mr. Calloway did nothing wrong. Preston's face went pale. "I was under stress. The amount was suspicious. I made a judgment call to protect the bank." "You made a judgment based on his clothes and his skin," Adeline said sharply. "We all saw it." Sterling stood abruptly. "Enough of this circus. Even if Preston made an error, that does not justify Calloway's attempt to destroy this institution with conspiracy theories about land theft and discrimination." Warren opened his worn folder and nodded to Arden. She moved around the table, placing thick document packets in front of each board member. They contained bank emails, altered appraisals, foreclosure timelines, loan records, and ownership chains reaching back through years of transactions. "These are not conspiracy theories," Arden said professionally. "These are bank records obtained through lawful channels, showing systematic targeting of elderly black landowners through account manipulation, property undervaluation, and forced foreclosure." Janet Crawford opened her packet and found her own signature on questionable appraisal approvals. "I don't remember authorizing these values. Some are far below market rate. That's because the appraisals were altered after you signed them," Warren said. "The original documents show different numbers. The modified versions were used to justify defaults and foreclosures." Vivian's stomach dropped as she recognized internal memos, with her signature recommending enhanced scrutiny for rural farming accounts. She had thought they were routine risk assessments. She had not known they were being used to target specific families. "Sterling," Vivian asked, "what is Langford Development's connection to these foreclosed properties?" Sterling's calm mask slipped. "I am a legitimate businessman who acquires distressed properties through legal channels. If some properties happen to belong to former bank customers, that is coincidence, not..." conspiracy. The door opened again. More elderly farmers entered with folders. Widows stepped in behind them, carrying payment receipts, foreclosure notices, and property maps. "Althea Boone, Riverside Farm," one woman said, pointing to a circled area on Sterling's development map. "Forced foreclosure after mysterious late payment penalties. Sold to Langford Development soon after for a fraction of what it was worth." Leon Mercer placed his finger on another circled property. Mercer, Family Produce. Account frozen during harvest. Missed payment because of the freeze. Foreclosure rushed through. Property sold to a Langford shell company below market value. Each former landowner identified their property on the development map. The pattern became too obvious to ignore. The same branch had created problems for black farming families. The same appraisers had undervalued land. The same development companies had purchased the properties at a fraction of their worth. Sterling stood sharply, anger reddening his face.
This board will not be manipulated by emotional theater and selective documents. These people signed legal contracts. If they couldn't meet obligations, that isn't the bank's fault.
Warren reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the torn pieces of the cashier's check. He placed them beside Sterling's development map, next to the circled properties that once belonged to the people standing around the table. He looked at Sterling, then at Preston, then back at Sterling. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard it. "You tore up the wrong man's check." The boardroom door burst open. Footsteps echoed from the stairs as several investigators entered, followed by police officers and a reporter with a camera. "Federal Banking Commission," the lead investigator announced, showing his badge. "We're here, following formal complaints regarding systematic lending discrimination and property fraud involving this institution." Arden stepped forward. "Agent Everett, thank you for responding. I filed the report after my client provided evidence of coordinated efforts to target elderly minority landowners through fraudulent foreclosure." Preston's face went white. He pushed his chair back and moved toward the side hallway. "I need to check on branch operations downstairs." Tobias stepped into his path. "No, sir, you need to stay right here. Get out of my way, you work for me." "Not anymore," Tobias said, pulling a flash drive from his jacket. He handed it to the investigator. "Full security footage, plus my statement that Mr. Vale asked me to delete portions of the video and replace them with edited clips." Preston lunged toward him, but an officer stepped between them. "Sir, step back and remain calm." Sterling grabbed his briefcase and coat. "I have no official connection to this bank's internal operations. I'm simply a concerned community investor." "Mr. Langford," Arden interrupted, removing a stack of documents. "These signed purchase agreements, property transfers, and shell company filings connect Langford Development to every foreclosed farm on this map. Your signature appears on acquisition documents signed shortly after each foreclosure. Those are legal business transactions," Sterling said, but his confidence had cracked. "There is nothing improper about purchasing available properties. Available because of manipulated loan reviews, altered appraisals, and coordinated freezes," the investigator said. "We'll examine every transaction between your companies and the properties owned by the people in this room." The reporter stepped closer, camera rolling. "Mr. Vale, can you comment on allegations that you targeted black farmers for account harassment and fraudulent foreclosure proceedings?" Preston backed against the wall. "I don't have to answer media questions. This is private business." Vivian looked around the room. Board members studied evidence packets with horror. Investigators took notes. Police watched Preston. Customers filled the doorway. The bank's reputation was collapsing in real time. She stood and addressed the investigator. "First Harbor Bank will cooperate fully. We will turn over requested records, suspend implicated employees, and create independent oversight for our lending practices." Sterling slammed his briefcase shut. "Vivian, you're making a serious mistake. This bank has powerful friends who won't appreciate being thrown under the bus to protect disgruntled farmers." Warren rose from his chair. He had stayed quiet through much of the chaos, but now his voice commanded the room. "As the holder of 40% ownership in this bank's parent company, I call for an emergency vote to remove Preston Vale from all positions effective immediately. Freeze all accounts connected to Langford Development pending investigation, and suspend any officers found to have participated in documented fraud. Janet Crawford nodded. I second the motion. All in favor, Vivian asked. Every board member except Sterling raised a hand. Motion carries, Vivian said. Preston Vale, you are terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Preston's face twisted with rage and panic. You can't do this to me. I built this branch. I brought in millions through development partnerships. These people are nobody. They're farmers, widows, and customers you defrauded, the investigator said. Officers escort Mr. Vale downstairs and make sure he does not access any computer systems or files. The officers moved to either side of Preston. Sir, come with us. Preston looked around wildly. There were no allies left. Sterling had already moved toward the door. Vivian avoided his eyes. The board stared at the evidence. As the officers guided Preston toward the stairs, he turned back toward Warren with pure hatred. This isn't over, old man. You have no idea what you've started. Warren met his stare without flinching. I know exactly what I started. Justice. They moved downstairs into the main lobby where customers had gathered after hearing the news. The counter where Preston had torn Warren's check was surrounded by people holding phones. Tobias walked behind Preston, making sure he could not reach terminals or documents. The reporter followed with her camera, recording his walk past the tellers he had supervised, the customers he had belittled, and the counter where he had humiliated a man he thought was powerless. Preston kept his head down as the officers guided him through the lobby. His polished suit and perfect tie looked like a costume that no longer fit. As he reached the glass doors, the crowd began to clap. It started softly, then it spread through the lobby until nearly everyone was applauding. Warren stood near the counter, still wearing his faded flannel shirt and straw hat. The customers who had watched Preston tear up his check now watched Preston's downfall. Later, sunlight streamed through the windows of First Harbor Bank as Warren pushed through the glass doors again. This time, he was not alone. Arden walked beside him, carrying legal documents that would reshape the bank's future. The lobby looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The same tellers stood behind the same counter, but they looked up with respect instead of suspicion. The same customers sat in the same chairs, but they nodded politely instead of staring with judgment. Vivian Bellamy waited at the main counter, not hidden in a private room. She wore a conservative navy suit and carried herself with the careful dignity of someone who knew the next conversation mattered. Mr. Calloway, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming. We have several matters to finalize. Warren shook her hand but did not smile. We do. Start with the check your manager tore up. Vivian nodded to Maris Colton. The teller who had first called Preston placed a new cashier's check on the counter, made out to Calloway Family Farms for $2 million. This replaces the check that was improperly destroyed, Vivian said. All Calloway Family Farms accounts have been restored without restrictions. The fraud review has been canceled and removed from your records. Warren examined the check, then looked up. That's the easy part. Now we talk about the families your bank cheated. Arden opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick legal document. The Eliza Calloway Rural Justice Fund, she announced clearly enough for the lobby to hear. Funded by bank restitution and recovered development proceeds. Administered independently. Dedicated to reopening foreclosure cases and compensating victims of predatory lending practices. Vivian's jaw tightened, but the board had already voted, and regulators were watching. The bank agrees to contribute $5 million immediately, Vivian read from her prepared statement. We will also surrender proceeds from properties improperly foreclosed, estimated at $12 million once Langford Development assets are liquidated. A murmur moved through the lobby. People who had been standing quietly began whispering. Some older customers wiped their eyes, thinking of land they had believed was gone forever. Warren placed one hand on the counter where Preston had torn his check.
Every family that lost property through account manipulation, false late payments, or suspicious appraisals gets reviewed. Every property undervalued during foreclosure gets a new independent assessment. Every family that was cheated gets compensation. Agreed, Vivian said. The fund will be overseen by a board with a representative chosen by affected families, an independent banking expert, and a community leader. Arden handed her a pen. Sign here. As Vivian signed the documents creating the Eliza Calloway Rural Justice Fund, Warren thought of his wife at their kitchen table, documenting every wrong she could find. Eliza had died not knowing whether the truth would ever reach daylight. Now her name would be tied to the work of making things right. "There's one more thing," Warren said quietly. Preston Vale. Vivian's expression hardened. Mr. Vale has been terminated and referred for criminal investigation involving fraud, evidence tampering, and retaliation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the State Banking Commission have opened formal reviews. And Sterling Langford, his development project has been suspended. Regulators seized records. His company accounts are frozen pending investigation. Warren nodded. The man who had tried to steal his land and the manager who had tried to shame him were both facing justice. More important, the system that protected them was being dismantled, piece by piece. "My family's farm?" Warren asked. Arden smiled for the first time. "Protected under an irrevocable family trust. No bank, no developer, and no agency can pressure you to sell. The land stays with your family." Vivian finished signing and looked at Warren. "Mr. Calloway, I want to personally apologize for the way you were treated in this bank. What happened was inexcusable." Warren studied her face, searching for sincerity. "The apology I need isn't just for me, it's for Eliza and for every family that lost land because your people thought rural folks couldn't fight back." "You have it," Vivian said. "The bank will issue public apologies to every affected family, and we are implementing oversight to make sure this never happens again." Warren picked up the new check and folded it carefully into his shirt pocket, the same pocket where he had carried the original check Preston destroyed. Justice had a strange way of coming full circle. As Warren and Arden walked toward the doors, Warren noticed something new mounted on the wall beside the customer service desk. A small brass plaque had been installed. "The Eliza Calloway Rural Justice Fund, protecting family farms and rural communities." Warren stopped and placed his weathered hand over his heart. The same gesture he had made at Eliza's funeral. She would have been proud to see her name honored in the building, where powerful people had tried to silence her truth. Then, he pushed through the glass doors and stepped into the sunlight. He still wore his faded flannel shirt and straw hat. He still walked with the quiet steadiness of a farmer who knew the value of land, labor, and patience. But now he was walking away from the bank that had tried to shame him and back toward the farm that would be protected forever. And the lesson stayed with everyone who witnessed it. Never measure a person's worth by their clothes, their shoes, their age, their job, or the mud on their hands. Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the deepest strength. Sometimes dignity does not need to shout because truth has a voice of its own. Preston's mistake was not only that he judged Warren too quickly. It was that he forgot power is temporary. But character leaves a record. Every choice we make becomes part of the story people remember about us. A cruel word can wound. A fair decision can protect a life. A moment of courage can open a door for people who have been waiting years to be heard. Eliza's work reminds us that kindness is not weakness, patience is not surrender, and justice often begins with someone refusing to look away. Warren's calm did not erase the harm that had been done, but it gave the truth room to stand. And, when the truth finally stood, it did not stand for one man alone. It stood for families, for widows, for workers, and for everyone who had been made to feel too small to fight back. Living with integrity does not mean we will never face unfairness. It means we choose not to become cruel when cruelty finds us. We choose responsibility over pride. We choose honesty over convenience. We choose to repair what we can, forgive what we are ready to release, and protect those who cannot protect themselves yet. Because in the end,
Real strength is not found in a title, a desk, a suit, or a bank account. Real strength is found in the way we treat people when we think they have nothing to give us. And the life we build with kindness, courage, and respect is the one no one can ever truly take away.